Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent and current reads video. It's been a hot minute since I've done one of these, so I'm just gonna get right to it because I have a lot of books to talk about. The first one I want to talk about is one that I mentioned the last time I filmed one of these, and that's Khafre Boy by Mathabane. This is a book, a non-fiction book that I read at the beginning of the month with Doris for her South African themed month. This is a true story of a black youth's coming of age in apartheid South Africa. So this book came out in the mid 1980s, and it's written from the time that Mathabane is a very young child, like 3 and 4 years old, up until the point where he is late teens. And I found this very interesting to learn more about what it was like for a black South African living in the outskirts of, I think it was Alexandra. Yeah, living in Alexandra, which was basically the ghetto, as a very highly regulated and abused portion of the citizenry of South Africa at the time. The problems that I had with this book were that there's a lot of detail about his day-to-day life at a very young age, like 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, that I just found it hard to believe that he could recall, you know, like how many times he had wet his pants in a particular day, you know, that sort of thing. It just didn't seem, reasonable to think that you would remember that level of details. But when we got to his later years, like his early teen years and on, I thought that part of the narrative was much better. And so overall, I did get a lot out of this, and I am glad that I read it. And I would just say, if you were going to pick something like this up, just be aware that I think, you know, he takes a lot of license with what was happening to him when he was, you know, a very young child. And then I finished a suspense mystery type novel. This is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. This is a book that I found really fun to read while I was reading it, but I don't know that it sort of will hold up as time goes on. I would call this a cross between Agatha Christie and David Mitchell. If you like trying to solve a puzzle, this is a really good book for that. So basically we're following our main character who is in a different body every day trying to solve this murder. And it's like a closed room type murder where all of these characters are at this manor house, this English manor house. And our main protagonist has to, first of all, figure out what body he's in every day and then try to put clues together from his previous experiences and from his current experience to try to help solve the mystery of this murder of this woman, Evelyn Hardcastle. This was a fast read and an engaging read, but it sort of fell apart a little bit for me at the end. I didn't think it held together at the end. I thought the author kind of threw in too many twists and turns and too many sort of like info dumpy, like this is why this happened kind of thing, you know, from the bad characters. And I just found that to be a little bit irritating. And so again, another good read, but not a great one. It was entertaining, but it wasn't what I would consider, you know, something that's going to stick with me for a long time. I listened to on audiobook Connections in Death by J.D. Robb. This is another one in the series of books about Eve Dallas, who is a police lieutenant in a futuristic New York City. I've talked about these a million times. I love them. In this particular mystery, this deals a lot with gang violence, which was kind of a different topic for one of these mystery novels, and I really enjoyed that look at gang violence and how that might interact with somebody trying to solve a murder. So I thought this was a really good addition to the series. I also finished Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham. This is the untold story of the world's greatest nuclear disaster. This was excellent, excellent narrative nonfiction. This is a book that you might find intimidating because it's a little bit chunky, and it deals with the nuclear disaster at Chernobyl, which, if you're not into nuclear physics, is a little bit of a daunting topic, but Higginbotham really handles this very well and writes a very propulsive narrative, even though there's a lot of characters that he deals with, and a lot of, what to a Western reader is difficult Russian names. The narrative just pulls you along. I did think that the first 2/3 of this were slightly more interesting than the last third, because the first 2/3 were dealing with the run-up to, the building of the Chernobyl nuclear facility, and then we're dealing with the disaster and how the disaster is handled, and then the last bit of it is more recent history, where we're dealing sort of looking at how the Russian government handled the disaster in the wake of the disaster, how they handled prosecutions of people that they said were basically responsible for the disaster, and how the Russian state, especially with the breakdown of the Soviet Union, how that all played into how the consequences of Chernobyl were dealt with. And it was interesting, but it didn't read like a thriller the way that it did in the first 2/3 of the book. The first 2/3 of the book are very action-oriented and very, very much like a thriller novel. And I just found it super interesting and engaging. I really liked it. It is such a great companion read to Voices from Chernobyl by Svetlana Alexievich, which I read last year and really loved. And in fact, I pulled that book out and started rereading sections of it, just because I could connect some of the names from this book with that book. So highly recommend Midnight in Chernobyl. If you like narrative nonfiction, give this one a go. I also finished a short story collection, and it's the one that I was working on for a couple of months with Sean over at Sean the Book Maniac. And it's This Taste for Silence by, let me look here at my notes, Amanda O'Callaghan, who's an Australian writer. This short story collection I really liked for the most part. I will say, though, that there are longer stories interspersed with sort of flash fiction, so stories that were like a page or a page and a half. And the flash fiction pieces, or the microfiction pieces, did not work as well for me. There just wasn't enough story there for me to really get anything out of them. I mean, I think Amanda O'Callaghan is really good at evoking an emotion from her writing, but overall there was nothing for me to sink my teeth into with those really short pieces, and nothing for me to really walk away with except for that emotion, but not as much something for me to think about for a long period of time. But some of the longer pieces I thought were really, really good. It is quite a dark collection, dealing with a lot of almost like suspense or horror even themes. And so that was kind of interesting for me, because it almost reminded me a little bit of Carmen Maria Machado's book. What was the name of her short story collection? I can't remember it. I read it a couple years ago. And that's a very dark collection as well. And this one actually reminded me of that a bit, in that it's very dark, although it's not, it wasn't solely on feminist themes the way that the Machado book was. So I thought it was good, and it's typical for me with a short story or an essay collection. Some pieces I really liked, and other pieces were just okay, and a few real clunkers. So, a mixed bag, but still an interesting read, and I'm glad to have gotten a little bit more Australian fiction under my belt. So what I'm working on currently is Fraud of the Century, Rutherford B. Hayes, Samuel Tilden, and the Stolen Election of 1876. This is by Roy Morris Jr. This is a political history of the election of 1876, and I read this because I'd recently read the biography of Rutherford B. Hayes, and I wanted to find out more about him because I'd read quite a slim biography of Hayes. And this is, it's pretty good, I would say, but it's extremely detailed with a lot of names thrown at you. So if that's not your thing, I would steer clear of this. But I am finding some interesting parallels between this book and what's currently happening in our political scene here in the United States, and also what happened in the 2000 election between George Bush the Younger and Al Gore. I think that was the 2000 election. And so, you know, it's just one of these cases of everything old is new again kind of thing, or, you know, we're just doomed to repeat ourselves over and over and over again. But it's interesting in that, by all accounts, or at least by this account, Hayes and Tilden were both fairly decent guys. Like, both really were good guys, and it was the people surrounding them that sort of played fast and loose with the rules, and basically were pulling all the levers to make sure their candidate won. I do find it a little bit disconcerting. Roy Morris Jr. is quite sympathetic to the Southern Democratic complaint of that there was too much Republican interference and too much interference from the federal government in order to make them sort of abide by the rules for allowing Black Americans to participate in the electoral system. And I find that a little bit uncomfortable. Morris's sort of attitude about that I find quite uncomfortable. So if you remember back in 1876, the Democrats were the party of states' rights, and they were the party, especially in the South, that was, for secession, and basically pulled the southern states out of the Union, which precipitated the Civil War. And the Republicans were the party of Lincoln, and so they were the party of emancipation and civil rights for Black Americans at that time. So it's a bit different from how those parties are characterized today. So it's just something to remember when you pick up a book from this time period. So this is good and interesting and filling in some blanks for me about Rutherford Hayes, but if you're not into this kind of very detailed political history, probably not a book for you. I'm also reading a book, another historical nonfiction. This is Cleopatra by Stacy Schiff. I'm buddy reading this with Britta Bowler, and I will try to remember to link her channel down below. We are having a great time reading this history. This is my first time reading Stacy Schiff, and I just want to shout out one of my viewers, Judy, who sent me this lovely hard copy in the mail when she heard that Britta and I were going to be buddy reading and that I didn't have my own copy and was waiting for it from the library. So thank you again, Judy. I'm so excited to have this. And I am absolutely loving this book. Stacy Schiff is an excellent writer of nonfiction, and I will definitely be checking out some of her other works. But Cleopatra was such an interesting person, and Stacy Schiff has pulled together what little we know about her life to give us this very, very entertaining look at this young, well, she was quite a young woman when she was leading her country and sort of manipulating things with Rome and with Caesar and with Mark Antony, and just amazing to think of Cleopatra at age 21, basically ruling the richest nation on earth at that point. So if you have not read this book, I would highly recommend it. I'm a little over halfway through it, and I can already tell you this is going to be one of my favorite nonfiction reads of the year, I think. It's really, really good. So looking forward to continuing on with that. And then the last book I want to talk about for this update video is The Shining Girls by Lauren Beukes. And this is, I don't know how to characterize this. This is like a suspense thriller, even bordering on horror. I am buddy reading this with Doris over at All the Books, and again, this is for her South African theme because Lauren Beukes is a South African author. This book reminds me, I told Doris, I read the first chapter and I thought, wow, this has the real tones of a Stephen King novel. So it's got that, I don't know, that same creep factor that Stephen King has, but the chapters are super short and they're told from different character perspectives. So we're kind of getting, we get the point of view of the killer and we get the point of view of some of his victims and some other folks that are sort of part of the story. But this is basically a story. I don't want to give too much away, so I'm just going to check that I don't give away too much. So basically our killer is Harper Curtis, and he is a time traveling serial killer basically, and there's a creepy haunted house type deal involved in this, and then there's Kirby, who is one of his intended victims, and she's like trying to figure out what the deal is with this killer. And so she's on the trail. She's hot on the trail of trying to figure out what's going on with this guy. And so we're kind of flip-flopping back and forth perspectives and time periods from each chapter, and the chapters are short, so you're just like reading, like trying to, like, you never want to put it down. It's very, very compulsive, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit. It's quite good. It is a little gruesome in parts, so if that's something that you don't like, you know, might have to steer clear. But for me, right now, and I'm about a quarter of the way into this, I'm really enjoying it. So this one's pretty good so far. So that is what I finished and what I'm currently reading in January, and you will have seen probably at the beginning of this video a little bit of a clip of what it looks like around here in January. It's been quite cold and we've had some snow, and so I hope you enjoyed that, and I will talk to you later.